We're going to give you a bonus today. If you have your Bible there, we're going to add to our scripture reading today, Matthew chapter 13. We're going to read verses 24 through 30, and then we are going to add verses 36 through 43. You'll understand why as soon as we read those two passages. Matthew chapter 13, beginning with verse 24, reading through verse 30, and then dropping down to verse 36, and continuing to verse 43. Jesus told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field, but while everyone was sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. When the wheat sprouted and formed heads, then the weeds also appeared. The owner's servants came to him and said, "Sir, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Where then did the weeds come from?" "An enemy did this," he replied. The servants asked him, "Do you want us to go and pull them up?" "No," he answered, "because while you are pulling the weeds, you may root up the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. At that time I will tell the harvesters, first collect the weeds and tie them in bundles to be burned, and then gather the wheat and bring it into my barn." And then dropping down to verse 36. Then he left the crowd and went into the house. His disciples came to him and said, "Explain to us the parable of the weeds in the field." He answered, "The one who has sowed the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is his world. The good seed stands for the sons of the kingdom. The weeds are the sons of the evil one, and the enemy who sows them is the devil. The harvest is at the end of the age, and the harvesters are angels. As the weeds are pulled up and burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will weed out and throw into the fiery furnace. I missed the line. They will weed out of his kingdom everything that causes sin and all who do evil. They will throw them into the fiery furnace, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears, let him hear." May God's blessing be added to the reading and the hearing of his word. On Tuesday evening, we were here at the church for a couple of meetings, and at the second of those meetings, Todd Rayber came in and participated in the meeting. And I looked at him and said, "How's the harvest?" And he got a smile on his face, and he said, "We're so glad to be in the fields and able to do that after the rain." They had delayed that process for a while. Every farmer farms for the harvest. It's a special time in the spring of the year when you plant the seed, and that's a lot of joy, I suspect, and whatever, but you don't just plant seed for the idea of planting seed. You plant seed with the idea that there will be a harvest. And there must be something very special about being a part of the harvest and seeing the fields be gleaned from all the stuff that's there and brought in to the storehouses and put away for whatever purpose it was intended. The harvest is special. Jesus is telling this parable. Now, a parable is simply an earthly story that helps convey a spiritual truth. It's not necessarily a true story, although it's nothing wrong with that. It's an example that the Lord uses to help us understand something deeper from a more spiritual perspective. And so he talks about a man who has a field, and in it he plants wheat. And the way that wheat would have been planted in Jesus' day is it would have been broadcast. They would have gone out with a bag hanging over their shoulder with wheat seed, and they would have taken a handful and they would have begun broadcasting it as they walked along. And you can still do that today. Maybe you do that with your grass seed if you have a few bare spots. I always have a few bare spots. Try to scratch the ground up, add a little nutrient soil to it, and then throw some seed on it. And I probably overseed more than I underseed. On this man's farm, he had hired laborers to go out, and they planted the best seed that he could find, the best wheat that he could find. Sometime, at a time unobserved by the owner of the farm or by the harvest or by the workers of the farm, someone had come into his field and sown seed that was a weed. No one ever sows weed seed. Many years ago, when I had a rather large garden, I was out working in the garden one evening after supper, and one of the parishioners from the church happened to drive by. My garden was very close to the cemetery road. And they happened to drive by, and they looked out, and I was in the midst of hoeing. And they said, "Pastor, we didn't think you would have any weeds in your garden." And I promptly said, "I didn't sow them. They just came on their own." And they said, "But you shouldn't have any weeds in your garden." And I said, "This is not the Garden of Eden. This is the Garden of Mike. There are lots of weeds in that garden, let me tell you." Todd has never sown weeds among his wheat or among his beans or among his corn. In fact, he probably has things that prevent weeds. Some kind of a Roundup product or whatever that's specifically for this certain crop, where it's not going to damage the corn, but it'll take care of everything else. Or he side dresses with ammonia hydroxide or whatever it might be. I'm not sure exactly how Todd does that. But you drive and you look at his fields and there's no weeds there. We don't sow weeds, weeds just seem to come. And in this situation, this was a confusing situation, because the weeds that were sown in this story were intentionally sown. There's no unintentional sin. There are sins of omission and sins of commission, where we omit doing something, but it's intentional. And there are sins of commission where we commit a sin, and that obviously is very intentional. These weeds were sown intentionally to disturb the harvest, to keep the harvest from happening. Now, in all probability, when Jesus is telling this parable, he's talking about a certain seed that's called darnel. I don't know any of this. I had to research it and look it up. Darnel is a form of wheat, but it is not good for human consumption. This weed looks like wheat, and so when it first grows up, you can't really tell it. But instead of having that nice head of wheat seeds on there, the ears, as they say in the King James Bible, the ears of those wheat there, it instead has black seeds. The plant looks almost exactly the same, but it has those black seeds in it. So you don't just harvest it and you don't just bring it in together, because those black seeds will cause dizziness and stomach problems for human consumption. And so what do? You separate it. But if you go out there initially to separate the wheat from the darnel, you're going to pull up the darnel plant. If you're capable of identifying it, you're going to be able to pull up that darnel plant, and you're also going to uproot the weed at the same time, and you won't have anything available for harvest. And so you allow the weeds and the wheat to grow together until harvest time. And at harvest time, you go out and you gather all the darnel, and you bundle it up in small bundles, and you throw it into the fire to be burnt. And now you gather the wheat. It's probably been somewhat uprooted already, but that's okay. That's what you're going to do in the harvest anyhow. And you're going to then put it on the threshing floor, and you're going to thresh it, and you're going to get what you're looking for, which is wheat. This is a complicated parable. Here's the point. Jesus gives the answers to the disciples and to us in that latter portion that we read. The wheat are the people of God, and the darnel are people of Satan. Isn't it interesting that they look very much alike when they're first growing up? They have a very similar appearance. The untrained eye and even the trained eye can probably sometimes not always tell the difference between the darnel plant and the wheat plant, because they look almost identical one to the other. You see, God has made us to be his servants, and Satan wants to come in and change that just slightly for us. The genetic principles of the difference between darnel and wheat are very close. They're just slightly altered. You see, Satan wants to fool us with things that look good, but are not good. Most of us don't struggle with the huge decisions of good and evil. You know, most of us are saying, well, okay, in my good days, I'm going to serve the Lord. And in my not so good days, I'm going to go out and buy drugs on the street corner and, you know, do all of those kinds of things. What we struggle with is the separation of that which is good and that which is best. I don't know if darnel has any other properties to it that would make it valuable in any way. Maybe it's okay for animal feed. I'm not sure. I didn't bother to research it all that much, because I lost interest in it at that point. I'm more interested in the spiritual application of this than I was in the genetic understanding of the difference between darnel and wheat. But Satan fools us. He is the great pretender. He is the one who comes alongside us, and he gets us to slightly change our point of view to something that's not radically different from what we are supposed to do, but something that is slightly different. And oh, what a problem that is. B every once in a while tries to fool me with something. And I think she's probably worked that wizardry on me on a couple of occasions. One time she'd prepared this meal for me, and what looked like mashed potatoes was not. It was cauliflower that was ground up and whipped with a little butter and some milk and whatever, and it was good, but it's not mashed potatoes. I mean, let's just understand. It's not mashed potatoes. It looked like mashed potatoes when I first got them out of the bowl and flopped them on my plate. I didn't get down close enough to smell to see whether it smelled like mashed potatoes. It had a taste similar to mashed potatoes because of the butter and the milk that was added to it, but it wasn't mashed potatoes. She wanted me to eat healthier, and I'm occasionally good at that. Mostly by accident, not by design. We learned in Sunday school this morning it's better to eat meat than vegetables, didn't we? I mean, wasn't that the point of the story? Satan comes alongside us, and he doesn't necessarily challenge us to look at what is obviously evil. He comes alongside us and he sows seed into our life that's similar. He is the great pretender. He can bring things alongside of us that seemingly look good, that smell good, that might even taste okay, but it's not the real deal. You know, we learn later in the book of Revelation, especially about the Antichrist who comes. Now, if you're a strong Christian person, you might say, well, I'm not going to be fooled at all by the Antichrist. Are you sure? Because the Antichrist is not going to present himself as evil. He is going to present himself as good. In fact, his goodness rivals the goodness of God. You know what the mark of the beast is? The number of the beast, 666. You know what God's number is? 777. Because it comes close, but it's not the same. On a trip to Haiti a number of years ago to visit Mark Hostler, who was serving on the mission field there at the time, we'd hear the drum beat late at night of the witch doctors. And I said to Mark, explain this whole process to me. Help me to understand why the witch doctors still have such power over people. And he says, Mike, I need you to understand that Satan is capable of doing nearly what God can do. And the witch doctors do bring healing to people, or else people wouldn't go. But it's healing that comes to them from an evil perspective. And so it's hard to overcome that product. People think that they're doing much better when they go see the witch doctor. And then the real problem is you have the Christians who know better, but who still want to go see the witch doctor. They want, so to speak, the best of both worlds. So when Jesus explains this parable, he says, the wheat is planted by the Son of God into the field, and it produces a wonderful harvest. But the weeds are planted by the son of this earth, Satan, who has evil and destruction in place for us. Bee's going to kill me for sharing this example, just so you understand. She went to get, one of her spices out of her spice cupboard yesterday. And as she opened it up, and thankfully it was the very first one that she picked, as she opened it up and dumped it into a bowl, she was going to mix up a concoction to put on some meat that I was going to grill. And as she dumped this particular spice into her bowl, there was a bug in that. And so, of course, she immediately threw it away, threw the container away, and washed out her bowl and all those kind of things. I wouldn't say, let's just pick out the bugs. Would you want to eat it if we had just picked out the bugs? Probably not. And you know what? The bugs looked a whole lot like what she was dumping in there, except they moved. If they'd have just held still, they'd have been okay for a while. Sin is similar to good. The harvest is this time of the year. Tonight we have that harvest happening, and I do hope that you come. It's a wonderful time. I'm hoping it really turns off cool once that sun goes down about 6 o'clock or a little after. I'm hoping it really is cool so that you want to get close to that fire and enjoy the warmth of that fire and all the fellowship of people and all those kind of things. It's part of the harvest. We are thankful that someone has invested in our lives to share the good news of Jesus with us. Help us to be reapers in that field of harvest, that we might come and bring in our harvest, that the storehouse would barely contain what we have to bring to you. Lord of the harvest, we ask that you would send us out to be harvesters in this